Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. I think my new favorite day of the week now is Wednesdays, in particular Wednesday morning. Because every day on Wednesday mornings, every Wednesday morning I should say, when I pull into the synagogue, I am reminded when we start morning minyan at 7:30 that baby Shai Cohen, Rabbi Cohen and Deb Pollack's son, who is all of 9 months young, who's right there in the corner, being held up for all to see, he comes to our morning minyan now. He comes with his father and he sits on the ground and he plays and he laughs and he is delicious, and then his father takes him to his daycare program. And it is the highlight of my week. He and I have a special bond. We laugh together, we clap our hands together. I've watched him grow to where he's now sitting up. He crawls all the way across in this really adorable scoot that he does in the chapel. And I realize that I'm on a high for hours afterward when he comes, and it just makes me so happy in my heart. Now, sitting across the chapel from him is Jonah Ruberg. Jonah Ruberg just turned 2 years old. That's Rabbi Ruberg's youngest son. And he sits there looking for the closest and most delicious snack. And I like to sit next to him. Sometimes he has mandel bread. And he just sits and looks for candies and lollipops and Cheez-Its and plays and points to the baby and says, "Baby." And watching them creates this sense of amazing nostalgia for me. Because I feel like I've been the rabbi at this synagogue for maybe 2.5 years, 3, but I'm really been here a lot longer. I'm completing my 16th year, starting my 17th year in July, and that's a real number. And when we moved here, Elias was exactly the same age as baby Shai. He was 3 weeks old when we moved here. And that first year of me being the rabbi here was exactly the same trajectory that baby Shai has. Now my son Elias is getting ready for his junior year. He's turning 16 in a few days. And it is surreal for me to watch baby Shai in his growth and to think, wow, that was my kid just a few minutes ago, even though it was 16 years ago. And I'm fairly confident, even though I didn't speak about it with Rabbi Cohen or with Deb, that if you were to ask them, 16 years might as well be 1,600 years for how long that feels to your kid is in that place where they're driving a car and they have independence and they're doing the things that 16-year-olds should do. But it makes me quite nostalgic to think this is where I was and this is how fast time moves. Now, I share that with you because when Dory, my wife, and I talk about this, she will almost perpetually be fixated on these moments of the past. She doesn't come to morning minyan on Wednesday. But if she did, she would wax historical for hours, if not days, about, do you remember when Elias did this? Do you remember when Evie did that? Do you remember when they started? This reminds me of X, and that reminds me of Y. And she gets very historical. I, on the other hand, as my kids both were 3 weeks old, 3 months old, 3 years old, and 13 years old, I perpetually thought about, okay, what's going to happen next for them? What will they look like as he's choosing colleges? And what will their careers look like? And how will this year happen? And what will their partners be like? And I was always planning far in advance for them. And there we were, and there we are, a family that often looks backward, and a family that often looks forward. But what about now? What do we do in moments like now? Because as much as I remember those days with fondness and the innocence of a 9-month-old in a chapel sitting up and babbling and clapping his or her hands and eating snacks and walking and scooting across the floor, I don't find that I'm spending so much time in that era. And what I also notice is that I don't wish to go back to it. I don't secretly pray, oh, what I would do to have that time all over again. Yes, I would like to go back knowing what I know now, then, so that I could absorb things and not make as many mistakes. All of us would. But I don't think about it in the sense of nostalgia insofar as that's all I want again. That's all I want to go back to. I don't appreciate where they are today or tomorrow. Why? Because those of you with children who are a little older know that as your child gets older, so do some of the challenges of your children. And so do some of the opportunities. And you use different parts of your mind and your heart and your soul for engaging with them and all that they're going through to address the dynamism of what is this maturation. And it isn't easy, and it can be rewarding, but it also can be very challenging and at times very frustrating. So why am I sharing this story about baby Shai and Rabbi Ruberg's son Jonah and my kids with all of you today? I was at a meeting with about 20 other rabbis last week, and a meeting was in the city for a pro-Israel organization. And a colleague of mine who I respect very much, who is passionately pro-Israel, said the following line that made my heart cry. I literally had to bite my lip to fight back tears, because this is a colleague who's very smart, who's very wise and very thoughtful, and this was clearly something that she had contemplated and then verbalized. She said, "The Israel that I knew and that I love seems to have died and isn't coming back." She said, "The Israel that I knew and that I love seems to have died and it isn't coming back." And when she said that, she was mournful. It wasn't like saying goodbye to a 100-year-old grandparent. It was the idea that with the state of Israel, what her connection to it was its cuteness, tantamount to a baby that can sit up, clap its hands, or scoot across a floor. That the innocence of a kibbutznik with a funny hat who could somehow or another, through luck or through ingenuity or a little bit of both, create drip irrigation and grow cucumbers and tomatoes and defend themselves against enemies, that was the beauty and the secret sauce of what was the state of Israel. But as the state of Israel continues to grow and to mature, it doesn't maintain that same identity. And if it doesn't, well, then it has no connection to me. I've been thinking a lot about my mom this year because, for those of you who don't know, my mom died unexpectedly. A beautiful and full life of 85 years, but she died unexpectedly in October of this year. And it's hard to get by an hour without being fixated about her. And especially the traits that she had, the characteristics that were so bright that the darkness of her absence feels so much more profound. And one thing that I admired so much about my mom is that my mom had grandchildren that ranged in age from 34 to 14. And she even had a great-grandson who's 3.5 now. And what was amazing about my mom is that she had relationship with all of them. And she did throughout all of their lives. So when my oldest niece was a little baby, it was my mom who was on the floor playing with her, with everything from toys and puzzles to speak and say. And as she grew, so did my mom's relationship with her. To the point where when my niece got married and had a baby, there was my mom sharing marital advice and parenting advice in a thoughtful and meaningful way. You see, my mom's relationship with her grandchildren didn't stay exactly the same. It grew and it matured and it evolved as they did. And that is a really special gift that my mom had, and to be fair, not to take anything away from her, that most grandparents had. Yes, It is adorable to be with babies, their innocence and their cuteness, and the little things that they do that makes us wonder about the magnificence of God and the beauty of how parents lend to a soul. But at the same time, what we hope for these babies is that they grow and mature into the people who they are. When my Elias was 2 or 3 years old, he would come into synagogue right about now, and we had to play goalkeeper at the door, because if I were delivering the sermon, he would come jetting down that runway and into my arms, even in the middle of the most solemn sermon. So we had to try and stop him from doing that until I was done with the sermon. And I remember those days fondly, and they were sweet. And now I have to bribe my son to even consider coming to synagogue. But isn't that what we want? Don't we want most 16-year-old kids to sleep in on the weekends and do the things that they're doing and to grow in the way that they do? And does it change my love for him at all? Does it change anything for him because he doesn't come running down the aisle and in fact tries to stay far away from me whenever he's around and I'm around with him? The state of Israel is going through an incredibly tumultuous time. It's the most internal tumultuous time, I would argue, since its existence. They've had externally tumultuous times like the Six-Day War, Yom Kippur War, the Intifadas, but internally, this is tantamount to their own civil war. It has been rife with political disagreement, with religious disparity, and with a lot of socioeconomic undertones. And much of what's going on in the state of Israel today is a fight for its true identity. And in that fight for its true identity, what we are learning about the state of Israel is that it is no longer that innocent little state with kibbutzniks with the triangular hat, growing tomatoes through drip irrigation, who hold an M16 over their shoulder. It has grown and it has evolved. The next generation of Israel will probably not see fighter pilots, because Israel, like most militaries, are now morphing into using primarily drones. And the reason behind that is because the most important asset of an air force is its pilot. And if your pilot can be in a safe place while the drone can be somewhere else, then that's the best way to use it. But does that mean that that's the safest way and the best way for Israel to be? Of course. Does it mean that we lose that sense of connectivity because we no longer see as many Israeli pilots? No way. When I was young, and I spent my first year abroad in Israel, I was 16, I remember walking up and down Ben Yehuda Street, and it was littered with Israeli soldiers all wearing green fatigues and guns. Every 10 feet, they were there. Today, that's not the case. And many people have told me when going to Israel, I miss not seeing all the soldiers that you would interact with every few steps. But part of the fact that they're not there is because, one, there's technology that allows their job to not be as necessary, and two, the country is significantly safer today than it was 20 or 40 years ago. Not fully safe, but safer. So do we celebrate that evolution that has happened, or do we mourn the change that has taken place? When I first came to Israel in 1990, and I drove up the #1 highway, there were still trucks scattered from the Independence War that were blown out. They were trucks that they put armor around, and they left them on the road on the way to Jerusalem to show the remnants of what the fighters had done to create the state. And about 12 years ago, the government came together and they painted those trucks and they put them on these stands and created this very formal recognition that you see when you drive up to Jerusalem now. And I remember thinking, how could they do that? They're supposed to be rusted out. They're supposed to be strewn just the way they were left. But the government said, we have grown and we have evolved. We are no longer what we used to be, but that doesn't mean that we're worse. if we were to look at any biblical character, from Adam to Noah to Abraham to Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, what we see in each and every one of these characters is a sense of maturity, growth, and evolution. Moses was an innocent baby who was left in a basket, who grows up into being a very headstrong individual, who then matures into being the leader of the Israelite people. Do we wish him to go back to what he was in the basket? Do we wish for him to be a teenager again because it was so much easier and so much more defined? Or do we celebrate the growth? As I started to mourn the statement of my colleague about the Israel that she knew and loved, that no longer is and no longer will be, I realized the responsibility we have as religious and community leaders to speak loudly and proudly about the growth and the celebration that countries like people can have. As my child grows, my children grow, and they prepare now for finishing high school and starting college as they are, I am excited and nervous and anxious and honored and blessed to be at this mile marker in life. And yes, I would love to hit rewind sometimes to cherish those moments that passed me by. And sometimes I'd love to hit rewind so that I could address those moments so much better now that I've gained some wisdom that I didn't have 3, 5, or 7 years ago. But none of us have that gift or blessing. However, that is part of the beauty of how we grow individually. And much like a child that stands with the cap and gown graduating in this season, we don't mourn what was, we celebrate what is and what will be. And so too during this tumultuous time in Israel, and it is tumultuous, and this unsteady time in Israel, and this time that is filled with infighting and instability, it is a time for us not to mourn what was, but to be anticipating what can and what will be. And to not make our relationship with our homeland so conditional that it only satisfies us when it makes us happy, but at other times, it has no use for us. None of us have relationships like that with family members, especially our children. And if Israel is the children of our shared people and our shared hope, then that is indeed how we must look at it and celebrate it. This week, as we celebrate 75 years of that dream and miracle coming to realization, let us grow in our acceptance of its new identity, and let us embrace that growth with trepidation, with a little bit of fear, some anxiety, but also tremendous hope in what can and what will be. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.